fair, I didn't want to interrupt you while you were talking, but a lot of the point you talked about, whether in the medical field or in the movie production field, I found interestingly, it works exactly the same way from my background, which is financial and technology. Yeah. And I realized no matter which industry you're at, and the end you land at the same spot. You land at the same understanding of the world.
Yeah, exactly. And all these like self-help. Are you recording about it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. We're like no, that's fine. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And you know, I think it's a similar principles really in all these sectors, and that's because all these sectors involve humans. And you know, there's something called the Pareto rule, which is 80% of activity, whether it's in an organization or with people, is predictable, right? And people are generally predictable. There's always in that 20% who don't follow the pattern, and that's where life gets interesting, and that's where I find it interesting. But the vast majority of people behave in certain ways, and that's why it is the same principles in all these sectors, and that's why the solutions are often similar too. You know, communication, leadership, broadening your perspective, all these kind of things. And it's the same issues we've been facing for thousands of years. It's the same process.
For us in the business setting, we like to control. We want to have 3 bullet points on this PowerPoint and not to miss any examples. But it disconnects because in a real setting, you meet real people and they ask questions, and it always goes beyond your script. And if all you are thinking about is what you're supposed to say rather than what actually the conversation should go, it disconnects with the audience. It's counterproductive sometimes.
I agree, it's counterproductive, it disconnects you, and also you're limiting yourself because you're not going to places that you could go to. You're not sharing ideas in a way that leads to new ideas. You're not innovating. You're not being entrepreneurial. You're just doing what's expected of you, what's always been done, and everyone lives in these little boxes and follows these certain paths, and you basically get nowhere. Well, you just do the same of what's been done before, which I don't really see the point of that. I think life's too short for that. So
how did you build up your confidence of dealing with uncertainties?
Well, I think as a doctor, you kind of have to, and you find yourself in scenarios which are really difficult, and you're having to make a decision, and you don't have all the information in front of you, because we're constantly faced with patients who have symptoms we don't know what the answer is. But what I found was really powerful was as soon as and this is your note in vulnerability, as soon as I say to the patient, you know what, I'm not sure I know what's going on, but maybe we can figure it out together. Suddenly, the whole relationship changes, and I feel a lot more relieved. They feel more relieved, but also more connected with me.
Are you scared of damage your credibility?
So I used to be, and I think a lot of my colleagues are, and I think there's a lot of doctors out there who are still afraid of uncertainty, and I think they struggle because they're always trying to like come across like they know what they're talking about, and they're too afraid to say the words "I don't know." And I think saying the words "I don't know" is super powerful. And the first time I did it with a patient, I was like, "Oh, this is going to completely make me look like an idiot." And the patient was like, "Do you know what? I really value that you said that." And then suddenly, it's the thing about vulnerability. I've shown my vulnerability, so now they're sharing their real kind of thoughts and opinions with me because they are connecting with that vulnerability. And then we figure out together, and particularly as a GP, because I worked as a GP for a year, and you have to do that in GP because you don't have access to investigations in the room, right? You can't get a scan or blood test straight away. So you have to be able to have that conversation about uncertainty, and you kind of have to share that space together. And it's the same with improv when you're performing. If you're performing with somebody who also can share that uncertainty with you, like we don't know what's going to happen here. Like I could say anything, you could say anything, but whatever you say, I'm going to go with it. And those are the best improv relationships. And the same in healthcare. If you just share that uncertainty with the patient, you go much further than trying to pretend you know what the answer is. In fact, that's probably dangerous, I think, in my opinion. I think probably something universal for doctors and for anyone, and probably the most important thing, I think, is self-awareness. So you have to be aware of what you're thinking, what you're feeling, how you're projecting yourself, how you're interacting with people. I think it's really important to understand how you perceive the world around you. So people often talk about how they want to change the world. And the way I see it is, if you change the way you see the world, then you are changing the world, right? So you don't have to go out there and lead a country or create a multi-million pound business. But if you go out there and you learn more about yourself and who you are and how you view things and how you view people, then you are changing the world, because the world is changing based on your perception, if that makes sense. So I think that's the best really way of having an impact is on an individual level. So I think that's going to be high up there. And then beyond that, obviously you need to, things we've mentioned already in terms of like communication. Listening is, I think, probably the most important part of communication. Taking in what people are saying and actually processing it and giving something back. That's quite a hard thing to do, especially like you say, you have a patient talking to you. You can sit there and listen to them, and in your head you're like, well, I know what this is. But if you actually take the time to really take into what they're saying, often there's a classical thing in medicine where we say 90% of the diagnosis is in the patient history, i.e. what the patient says. Often patients are talking, and then afterwards you get a diagnosis and you realize it was in the initial consultation, but you just never accepted it because you were relying on the test. We often get these cases where like somebody, comes in with a series of symptoms, like symptoms of infection, and then, they're getting fevers and night sweats and these kind of things. The doctor immediately goes to their way of thinking, oh, they've mentioned these symptoms, I need to think about these things, but they've ignored the bit about how it came off the plane. And that's because you weren't listening, right? And then if you actually think about it, oh, so where did you actually fly from? Because if they just flew from Paris, whatever, but if they've flown from Africa, or if they've flown from like some exotic country or whatever, then that changes the game completely. So those kind of things always come up classically in medicine. So active listening, I think, is a really useful tool generally in life, and I think it's something that takes a lot of practice. Like really listening to someone, which involves you not thinking about something else. Because often you're talking to someone, but you're thinking about something else. You're thinking about that email you need to respond to. You're thinking about your deadline coming up tomorrow. Or they're talking, and you've already decided in your head what's important, right? So they're talking to you about something, and you're, oh, okay, fine. So that's not important. Let's talk about this next. And you're gonna have to really actively be like, this is everything they're saying is important.
And I'm always very curious about how do you deliver a bad news to the patient, because it can be very tough.
It is, and so one thing you have to do is you have to always start with a warning sign, and then you have to go straight to it. This is not something you want to float around for 4 or 5 minutes. So the scan showed some abnormalities, and it's not quite that good, and the blood tests, we were looking at the blood test, and it's like, no, just tell me, is it cancer? Because that's what they want to know. That's what everyone wants to know, is it cancer? So you have to say, I'm afraid this is not good news, and you say, unfortunately, your tests show you have lung cancer. You have to go in straight away. But I think then what's really important is you pause. Because some people will break down crying, some people will be completely stoic, and they just want to know, okay, fine, so what's next? And then I think from there you improvise in terms of whether you leave the room, whether you answer questions, whether you give them time.
How would you manage that emotion? I
think what a lot of doctors do sometimes is they kind of normalize it too much to try and distance themselves. And I think there's a happy medium. I think you can't get too emotionally involved, because every conversation would destroy you and you'd burn out. But at the same time, I think you can't be completely distanced, because I don't think that makes a good doctor. I think there has to be something in the middle. But I struggled initially, but I think then over time you normalize it a bit and you get used to it. You have a sort of pattern you follow. And I think a big catalyst was COVID. The conversation about death became, a twice daily conversation. So in 8 years, I had maybe, come across maybe 10 deaths. And then in the space of 2 months over winter during lockdown, I had come across 20 deaths, right? So it really ramped up the level of conversation. And a lot of it was over the phone as well. And it sounds bad to say, but I became really good at giving bad news over the phone, because I was doing it all the time. There was that period, especially during that winter lockdown, wave 2, where for 2 months straight, basically you just watch people die. It was awful. But you quickly got used to it, and you kind of, you just got into a rhythm of it.
How do you deal with your own emotion of that? Because it must be very hard for you emotionally to handle as well.
I think I'm lucky. I have a good group of friends. There's something about spending time with like children. I think is quite nice because they're so young and hopeful. When you're going through difficult things, just spend a bit of time with a child. I think is therapeutic. And I also have a generally diverse life. So I have different friendship groups and I have different activities. And I think a lot of the creative activities helped because there was an outlet. You know, improv. You know, producing, writing, whatever. That helped a lot, I think. Whereas if I just was a doctor doing that, had nothing else, I think I probably would have struggled, as a lot of my colleagues have.
So for any students who currently medical school,
Yeah.
top 3 suggestions to get them prepped for this upcoming career.
Okay, I would say number 1, take your time. You don't need to figure out what type of doctor you want to be now. I have been a doctor for 11 years and I've switched scenarios and directions 3 or 4 times. I've worked in the private healthcare system. I've worked as a leader, so I worked as an NHS manager. I worked as an educator. I tried to become a GP, but it wasn't for me. It was too isolating. And now I've come back to acute medicine in hospital. Don't worry about having a particular path right now. Take your time, do your first few years, and just sort of take it all in, really. Just sort of, you know, figure out who you are, what your priorities are in life, and choose a career based on the people you will work with rather than the work you're doing. If you want to be a neurosurgeon, you're going to be working with neurosurgeons, right? There's only certain hospitals where you can do that, and there is, you know, certain characteristics of what it's like to work as a neurosurgeon. If you like to be in a team, don't do GP. If you like to challenge yourself, don't pick something boring. You know, that kind of stuff. Ultimately, you're working in a clinical environment, you're treating patients, so that doesn't change. If you want a 9-to-5 life, don't choose acute medicine. I don't want a 9-to-5 life.
Oh, really?
So I like doing, I like having a busy few days and then having a few days off.
What is your schedule like?
It changes every week. So I'm doing 9-to-5 this week, and then next week I'm working evening shifts, and then the next week I'm doing 3 night shifts, but then I get a week off. So just think about like what you want in the future. So that's number 1, I think, is take your time. Number 2 is find a role model. I've had a lot of role models in my career, and that really helps you because it gives you an idea of where you want to be. But don't listen to everyone, because everyone's always going to give you their advice, including me. Everyone's always going to say, you should do this, you should do that. No, this is wrong, that's wrong. There's always going to be people who are going to tell you what not to do or what path not to follow. And often those people are saying those things from a place of insecurity or a place of incompetence, really. You figure out your own path. In this day and age, you can do anything you want. You can be a doctor who makes films. I've got colleagues who are running, you know, multi-million-pound businesses in health tech. I know GPs who work 2 days a week and go to the Bahamas, you know, every month. You can be an academic neurologist who is, you know, dealing with brain disease in a lab, you know, doing a PhD. Like, you can literally do anything you want. So find your path. I think don't follow someone else's path. And then I think the third thing would be is look after yourself. Being a doctor is great, but doesn't need to take over your life. Have a social life, do interesting things, do fun things, spend time with your family, with your friends. Don't pressure yourself into, you know, having 7-day weeks where you're in the library all the time, revising for things. And life in general is a bit more stressful, you know, with housing crisis and economic crisis and all these things. So I think don't make life harder for yourself by burning out because you feel you have to be in the library on your days off revising for certain things. Like, just enjoy your life, enjoy the journey. I can tell you now, a lot of my colleagues have gone straight through the training program and they've worked super hard, and they get to the age of 35 and they've reached consultancy, and then they're like, right, now what? You know, they don't have a life, they don't have friends, they don't have any passions, they have no family, and they're just like, what was the point of that? So I think in order to succeed, you have to work with people and if you can figure out the key of A, your own self and the relationship with yourself, and then B, the relationship with other people, then there's no limit to where you can go.
Completely agree. And thank you so much for being my guest.
Absolutely, pleasure to be here.
Usually I have a script and I give my guests a little bit of heads up what kind of question will be asked. But with Eddie, because I knew it doesn't work that way, I hope a lot of the thoughts Eddie shared and a lot of his personal experience can be inspiring for all of you to achieve your potential. I learned a lot from our conversation, so thank you so much.
No, pleasure to be here. If anybody wants to contact me at any point, my website is addyfilms, addyfilms.com. So feel free to email me or send me a message on Twitter or whatever. I'm very happy to chat if anyone's interested.
Yes, and I will have Eddie's contact information within the information box and also within this video. So feel free to reach out to Eddie. He's such a fun character. And I hope everyone has a great weekend and see you next time.